I remember the day Chinyere first arrived in our village as Mazi Okeke's new wife. She was a quiet woman, small in stature but with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When the women of our compound went to welcome her, she stood beside her husband, her wrapper tied neatly around her waist, and nodded respectfully as each woman spoke. At first, we thought she was timid. Later, we learned she was simply watching. Mazi Okeke was the first son of his family, which meant that his home belonged to everyone. His brothers came and went as they pleased. His mother, Mama Okwu, had a permanent place in his house, and even his uncles would visit unannounced, expecting to be fed and served. A wife in such a household was not just a companion. She was a servant to all, and Mama Okwu made sure Chinyere knew it. From the first day, Chinyere's duties were endless. She woke before the sun to fetch water from the stream, swept the compound, and pounded yam until her arms ached. Mama Okwu had a sharp tongue and never hesitated to use it. "Is this how your mother raised you?" she would say if the soup lacked enough pepper. "A real woman does not complain," she reminded Chinyere when she hesitated before scrubbing the veranda after a long day. Her husband, Mazi Okeke, said little. He believed in peace and avoided confrontation, even if it meant leaving his wife to suffer in silence. One evening, after weeks of enduring this treatment, Chinyere sat on a small stool behind the kitchen, staring at the dying embers of the firewood. I was passing by when I saw her. Her face was blank, her eyes fixed on nothing. "Nwam, are you well?" I asked, sitting beside her. She turned to me and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that held no joy. "I am well, Mama Nkechi. I'm only thinking." I did not ask her what she was thinking about. I already knew. I had been a daughter-in-law once too. That night something changed. Chinyere went about her chores as usual, but there was a calmness to her, a quiet determination that I had not seen before. The real change came 3 days later. It was the evening of the new moon, a night when the men of the family gathered in the obi to drink palm wine and discuss village matters. As always, Chinyere was expected to serve them. But this time she did something different. She prepared a feast, a meal so rich and fragrant that even the neighbors peered over their fences to see what was cooking. There was bitter leaf soup, thick with pieces of bush meat. There was pounded yam so smooth it stretched like silk. She grilled fish wrapped in banana leaves and fried plantains to a golden brown. When it was time to serve, she brought out the bowls, one by one, placing them in front of each man with a deep bow. The men were delighted, laughing and praising her. But then they took the first bites. Mazi Okeke frowned. "Chinyere, why is the soup so bitter?" His younger brother spat his food into his hand. "And the plantain, why is it burnt?" His uncle coughed. "The yam is too soft, like a child's food." Mama Okwu took a sip of the palm wine and grimaced. "Why does this taste like salt water?" Chinyere remained kneeling, her hands folded in her lap. Then for the first time since she arrived, she spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I have only prepared the meal that reflects my life in this house. The bitterness of the soup is the bitterness I have swallowed every day. The burnt plantain is the harsh words I have endured. The soft yam is the exhaustion that weakens my body. And the salty wine is the tears I have shed." The compound fell silent. Even the crickets outside seemed to stop singing. Mama Okwu looked at her son, then at the food, then back at Chinyere. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. One by one, the men lowered their spoons. Nobody finished their meal that night. The next morning, something unusual happened. Mama Okwu did not call Chinyere to sweep the compound. Mazi Okeke went to the stream himself to fetch water. His brothers did not come by unannounced that day, and for the first time Chinyere sat outside her hut, stretching her legs in the sun, watching as her husband picked up the broom and began to sweep. From that day forward, things changed in that household. Slowly but surely, respect found its way to where it was due. And whenever I passed by and saw Chinyere walking through the compound with her head held high, I smiled to myself because I knew that sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to serve the meal it deserves. For the first few days after Adora returned home, there was an unspoken tension between her and Chioke. Though she was grateful to be back with her children, she remained cautious. She had seen too much and endured too much to believe that change could happen overnight. She watched Chioke closely, observed how he handled the responsibilities of the home. He had hired the housekeeper as promised, and for the first time, Adora saw him taking an active role in their children's lives. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long golden shadows over the village, Adora sat outside, cradling their newborn son. The compound was quiet, save for the distant chatter of women returning from the stream and the laughter of children playing under the mango tree. Chioke emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a cloth. He had been helping the housekeeper with dinner, something Adora never thought she would see. He sat beside her, hesitating before he spoke. Adora, I know words are not enough, but I want you to know that I understand now. I see how much I failed you, and I swear I will never let that happen again. Adora remained silent for a while, staring at the horizon. Change is not in words, Chioke. It is in actions, and actions must be consistent. Chioke nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. I will prove it, not just to you, but to myself and our children. As the days turned into weeks, Adora found herself softening. Chioke was not just trying to help, he had become a present father and husband. He woke early to see the children off to school, helped prepare their meals, and even carried their newborn son when Adora needed rest. He listened when she spoke, something he had never done before. The house was no longer just a place where Adora worked tirelessly. It was a home where both of them shared responsibilities. One evening, Chioke's mother sent a messenger requesting to visit. Adora was hesitant, but Chioke reassured her. She will not stay long, and this time things will be different. When Mama arrived, she was not the commanding woman Adora had known. There was a certain hesitance in her steps, a humility that had not been there before. She looked around the house, noticing the changes. It was no longer a place where her word was law, but a balanced home where Adora was treated with respect. Nunye Mama addressed Adora, her voice softer than before. I have come to say that I did not realize how much I was hurting you. Adora met her gaze, unsure of what to say. She had never expected an apology from Mama. I grew up in a time when women were expected to endure, to serve without question. But I see now that it is different. It should be different, Mama continued. I see how my son has changed, and I see that it is because of you. I hope you can forgive me. Adora inhaled deeply, then exhaled. She had carried resentment for so long, but hearing these words, she felt something in her heart loosen. It is not easy to forget, Mama, but I will try to forgive. Mama nodded, wiping the corner of her eye. That is all I ask. From that day, Mama no longer imposed herself in their home. She visited occasionally, but no longer overstayed or demanded to be served. And for the first time, Adora felt that she was not just a wife or a mother, she was a partner, an equal. The villagers whispered about the changes in Chioke. Some were shocked, others skeptical. A man who was once blind to his wife's suffering now carries his baby and sweeps the compound. They marveled. But Chioke paid them no mind. He had learned that pride had almost cost him his family, and he would never let that happen again. One evening, as Adora sat under the moonlit sky watching her children play, Chioke joined her, their baby asleep in his arms. He looked at her, a soft smile on his lips. You were right, Adora. Marriage is not about one person sacrificing everything. It is about balance, about respect. Adora smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Yes, Chioke, and I'm glad you finally see it. Their home, once filled with strife, was now a place of love, understanding, and teamwork. It was not perfect, but it was theirs, and they had built it together. Chuki returned home from the hospital that evening, his mind heavy with the weight of his mistakes. The house felt empty despite the presence of his children. They had eaten, bathed, and were now in their rooms, but their laughter, the warmth that once filled their home, was missing. It was then that he fully understood. His family had not just lost Adora, they had lost the heart of their home. Days turned into weeks as Chuki continued to care for the house and the children alone. The exhaustion was relentless, but he refused to complain. Every morning, he woke up before dawn to prepare breakfast, dress the children, and take them to school before heading to work. In the evenings, he helped with homework, prepared dinner, and put them to bed. The housekeeper he had hired worked hard, but even with the extra help, Chuki realized that running a home required more than just physical labor. It required patience, love, and presence. One night, as he sat on the veranda staring at the sky, his mother called. He let the phone ring. He had nothing to say to her. She had sent messages through relatives, insisting she was only trying to help and that Adora had been weak. But Chuki knew better now. He had allowed his mother to dictate his marriage, and in doing so, he had nearly lost the woman he loved. Finally, after a month, the day arrived when Adora was to return home. Chuki had prepared everything. The house was spotless, and the housekeeper had settled into her duties well. The children had barely slept the night before, their excitement barely contained. When the sound of a vehicle pulling up reached their ears, they ran outside, their voices ringing with joy. Adora stepped out of the car, her newborn son cradled in her arms. Chuki stood at the door, his heart pounding as he watched her. She looked different, stronger, more certain of herself. She met his gaze, and for a moment, time stood still. Then the children ran to her, wrapping their little arms around her waist, their laughter filling the air. As Adora stepped inside, she looked around the house. It was clean, orderly, and there was a sense of peace she had never felt before. She turned to Chuki, searching his face for the truth. Had he truly changed? "I have a housekeeper now," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "And I understand now, Adora. I understand everything." She nodded, shifting the baby in her arms. "Good," she said simply. That night as they lay in bed, Chuki turned to her. "Adora," he whispered, "I will never take you for granted again." She exhaled, a deep sigh that carried months of pain, disappointment, and loneliness. "We will see," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The lesson: marriage is a partnership that requires teamwork, empathy, and shared responsibilities. Pride, neglect, and external interference can destroy a home, while listening, respect, and mutual support strengthen it. Women should not be overburdened with household duties alone. And seeking help is not a sign of weakness. Now, managing a home is demanding, and everyone should contribute rather than undermine the efforts of others.